Hello, I'm Lelia Pendleton, and welcome to Bank Shot Theater. We are old storytellers, and we know that most of the stories end with, and they lived happily ever after. But what does that mean, living happily ever after? We never know. I mean, going as far back as the legend of Psyche and Cupid, and they all lived happily ever after. But most of the people in the stories are not people who would be content to just sit around happily ever after. I think they'd want to make a life of their own, like Psyche, who loved a god and was made immortal, and then lived happily ever after. This is how I think she lived. There once was a woman named Psyche who loved a good, sweet, and magical man, an invisible man. At first, that was the rule. She couldn't see Cupid because she had to prove her love for him or some such nonsense, which didn't work out so well because she was only human and succumbed to doubt and curiosity, which drove him off. But he loved the courage with which she faced the challenges her mother-in-law set before her, and like the Greek god he was, defied his mother, gathered up his wife, and carried her back to their palace, where they lived happily ever after. And at which point he became visible. There really is something to that Greek god thing. Shoulders, arms, and those amazing white wings. Oh yes, life with a god of love has definite positive aspects. But just because he became visible didn't mean he stayed visible. He worked all the time and was exhausted just trying to get home. His work took him to increasingly dangerous places, and he was exhausted just trying to get back alive. About the only way Psyche knew he was home was the warm lump in bed, snoring lightly. And then there's the guy residue. Oh, you know, like computer games left on, and dishes in the sink, and clothes on the floor. What's in his pocket? Oh, bottle caps and pennies, little rolled up pieces of paper, and in this case, feathers. Well, think about it. He's a winged man. Don't even mention molting. But Psyche didn't mind the residue. His absences became longer and longer. Sometimes he was gone before she awoke and returned only after she was asleep, so she didn't mind the residue. It meant he was there, of his own free will, and it gave her some insight into his mind. His penchant for dying a horrible death by a computer, or saving pennies and paper. And there was always the smell of the wind on his clothes. But after a while, the pennies, the paper, the odds and ends from his work began to pile up faster and faster. In order to find her stuff, she had to deal with his stuff first, and this began to irk Psyche. And then to downright piss her off. This wasn't what she bargained for. She hadn't borrowed beauty secrets from the queen of the underworld for bottle caps. She hadn't spun flax into gold, thread, worn out 3 pairs of iron shoes, and separated all of those tiny little seeds for bottle tables, but more than the stuff underfoot, and on the chairs, and on the tables, and on the windows. The residue came to mean that he wasn't there, that he had been, but he was no longer, or he was in bed asleep, too exhausted to be involved. The residue came to mock Psyche, and she became more and more lonely. Psyche began to play with the cast-off feathers. She long admired their flight in the air, how a single breath could give them life. And she'd studied birds and hang gliders. So she decided to build herself some wings. She knew about Icarus's rash flight. Wax was not the way to go. There are better substances now to hold form and feathers together. But they couldn't hold them together for good. She just couldn't balance shape and size to keep her up for very long. And with every landing, feathers scattered everywhere. And she could never fly. One day, Cupid came home early and found Psyche sitting amidst the feathers and goo. There was evidence of failed attempts all around, and it was obvious that this one wasn't going very well either. He stood a while and watched, and slowly he began to understand what it was he was seeing. Without a word, he pulled a feather from one of his own wings and stuck it between her shoulder blades, her wing bones. Amazing white wings grew from that single feather. And together, thank you.